Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Korkie's Corner, episode 7. There are some roster change news that has dropped, but there is more. I think we could be seeing the beginning of a major shift in terms of hockey with the QMJHL news. We'll see whether we agree with it or not over the course of the podcast, and some retirements and maybe not so retirements here today on the podcast we'll be discussing as well. Joining me is my co-host, writer of Ice Cold and Deadly, working on the upcoming projects, the book, The Bettman Conspiracy, and the YouTube show, Seeking Sadhguru, my dad, Mike Korkie.
Hey everyone, it's great to be here. It's great to be here, John.
Yep. Thanks, Dad. So yeah, of course, I touched on it a little bit here in the intro here, but the Quebec Major Junior League has announced that there will be no more fighting in their junior league, and I was wondering if I could get your thoughts on no fighting in the junior leagues above Junior A and the main feeder into the NHL, one of the big three.
Yeah, I think that it's sort of the direction this is headed. It almost feels like the powers that be want to take fighting out of the game, and I mean, in a lot of ways, it kind of makes sense. I mean, I like the fighting, but they know about the concussion stuff now. There's a huge liability involved with guys getting CTE and all those things. So you can start to see a trend where they're starting to mitigate it, and it's really going to be driven by the lawyers from here on out.
Yeah, so here's my opinion on it. I think when it comes to, I do understand, like, I think NHL hockey should absolutely be treated differently for younger players. I think with the leagues I played in, like, even the clean hit that Trouba hit on Timo Meyer should only be a legal hit in the professional leagues, in my opinion. I think you don't need 14-year-olds coming in, making direct contact to guys' heads. Completely get that, completely understandable. For me, the Quebec Major Junior, though, I think it's the Western Hockey League and the Ontario Hockey League. The line is a little bit blurry because they are the main feeder into pro hockey. I think the argument they gave is to help players with life after hockey. To me, that's not the job of the junior leagues, is to help players with life after hockey. Their job is to make them the best possible hockey players they can be. And it's the job of schools in those area and the parents of those kids to help with life after hockey and learn those skills.
Well, I
And
think it
I,
misses the point, though. I think that misses the point because it's they can still you can still have a system where you don't ban fighting and players can essentially opt out of fighting. So you could make a system where instigators or beating on a player who's choosing not to fight are severe penalties without completely banning fighting. And I still think that 17, 18-year-old players that want to make the decision to fight should be allowed to do that. And as far as the big hits, I'm going to disagree with that a little bit too. I grew up in an era when we wore less equipment and there were big hits all the time. You didn't make what we call the suicide pass because your buddy that got the suicide pass was going to hit you harder than he got hit. After the game, you kind of learn to keep your head up. And by the way, I don't know anybody of all the guys that I grew up playing with in hockey, and we all got hit hard. I don't know anybody now in our 50s that has had any problem with post-concussion syndrome. Not one person. So I don't buy into this argument that having that kind of contact as a kid is going to lead to lifelong problems. I just don't. And we've seen you've got generations to look back on. Now people will disagree, and there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. But if that's the case, nobody would get into a car because that's dangerous. I mean, you can't. It's the whole bubble wrap argument. You can't be wrapping
yeah.
people in bubble wrap just because something could happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think so. I think you should be allowed once you hit a certain age, and there's a debate on whether to have the age group. I know it used to be Pee Wee when I started playing hockey. while I was playing hockey, they moved it up to bantam. I think bantam is the perfect age for that because a lot of the kids have hit that growth spurt at around the same height by the time you get to bantam hockey. And hard hit should always be a part of the game. I'm not saying that, like, I just think, and I pride myself on that. I only ever gave, I mean, how many hits do you think I threw in my hockey career, Dad? 1,000 to 1,500?
Well, I mean, thrown versus landed, there's a big discrepancy there.
Okay, thanks, Dad. But anyway, I mean, I'm not going to pretend I was a great player or anything, but one thing I prided in, like all the hits I threw, all the hits I landed, I only potentially laid one dirty hit that gave a kid a concussion. The other injuries that were involved was a broken collarbone to another kid, and I think that's it. Only two ever injuries in the hits I've thrown, and looking back, I take pride in that. I never aimed for the head. I think there is a way to play the game where hard hits are always part of it. But for youth hockey, do I think a 14-year-old should be able to just take a run at a guy's head? Probably not. So there is a balance in, like, as you get older, as the hockey gets more elite, it becomes more physical. And I think Quebec Major Junior, a lot of those kids that are playing the Quebec Major Junior, a lot of them say only like 10% of kids make the NHL. That's 10% of kids that make the NHL. But a lot of those kids, they're going to end up playing in the ECHL and AHL, and those leagues have far more fighting than the NHL because a lot of those guys are having to fight to try to make the NHL. So that's a disservice to a lot of those players that are going to be playing in the ECHL and AHL. Not to mention, you have the Southern Professional Hockey League, which is probably, I haven't heard a lot about the Southern Professional Hockey League, but I imagine it has more fights than even the ECHL. And then you have the league down here. I live in Winston-Salem. There's the Federal League. I mean, that anyone who plays in the Quebec Major Junior League could play in the Federal League tomorrow if they wanted to. But that league has a crap ton of fighting. It's gone viral on the internet. The local team, the Thunderbirds, their coach has gotten a fight during a handshake line. So I do think in some ways getting rid of hockey is a disservice to the hockey development because, yeah, only 10% of them are going to make the NHL. But in the pro leagues in North America, the NHL is the league with the fewest amount of fights. So I don't think that argument is valid considering a lot of your players are going to be in the AHL or ECHL, which are far more physical, far more dirty style of hockey than the NHL.
Well, do you know what caused the ban on fighting?
The Minister of Sports for Quebec.
Yeah, they basically, it's political, right? So, I mean, of course, it's coming out of Quebec. I mean, the French guys have always been known to be quite soft, and so of course, this is the tip of the spear here is Quebec. But yeah, they basically said, well, we'll support you through COVID, but you owe us one, and the what you owe us is that when all is said and done, we're going to decide that you're not going to allow fighting in your league, which I think is just the most disgusting way of doing it. But it's typical of politicians.
No, I know. And I mean, I think it is a shocker, a politician with an ego. And this is not taking sides on politics thing. It's just an example of a politician's ego. I think, and I'm not even going to name them because I don't know their name, don't care to know their name. They basically want to be able to be the politician that's like, "Ooh, I was the one to create the major change in hockey," even though they probably never played it. But they're able to sit there and they're going to be like, "I was the one that instilled that change in hockey. I fought for that change in hockey." And it's just a power trip for the Minister of Sports in Quebec.
Yeah, now it'll be interesting to see where this heads and how it cascades from the Quebec League, but there is a discussion to be had about whether fighting in the NHL. This is fairly topical because I was just listening to an interview with a guy by the name of Brant Myers, who was one of the toughest guys in the NHL for quite a few years. Not the toughest, but he suffered a lot of the consequences of the fighting. He got really addicted to medications. And can you mute when you're not talking so your stupid dogs aren't
All right, hold
it's
on.
like they're distracting me.
All right, so all right, everyone. All right, everyone. Sorry about that.
Can I
So,
continue without being interrupted by the dogs?
yeah,
I was
I,
on a roll. Thank you very much. So as I was saying, Brant Myers wrote his book Painkiller, and it sort of highlights his role into his descent into addiction, and a lot of it, the addiction was based on the pressure of having to fight all the time. I'll tell you a little story about Brant Myers after I make my point. So, so it speaks to the question of should guys have to. I mean, professional sports is all about pressure and it's all about intimidation and everything like that. But should guys have to go through that of the potential of being pummeled, and that's their only job is to go out and either pummel the guy across from them or be pummeled? That's not that's a debate that I think is a valid one. That I never it got to the point where you didn't really see, well, what are these two guys doing out there? Like they can hardly play relative to the other guys, and what impact are they really having other on the game other than firing up their guys? Right? I'm kind of it's old school, and I guess it's evolved enough that I'm kind of glad that those types of fights are gone. But Brant Myers, your Uncle Owen actually played on like a Team Alberta thing with him, and this was before he became like a big, well-known fighter. And they had this deal where like his dad was coaching, and he was part of the deal was he was selling the signing up for the team. He sort of had this stick deal because he had this sporting goods store, and so all the players were buying sticks. Well, one thing leads to another, and your Uncle Owen didn't get all the sticks that were promised to him or something like that. And guess who was threatening to go picket their store?
Brad
Your,
Myers.
your Grandma V was
Oh,
threatening to go picket the store of Grandma V. So do the math here. If 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 Brant Myers is one of the toughest guys in the NHL, do you think his dad might possibly be tough? And what kind of position would that have put Grandpa Bob in if Grandma V is out there picketing this gigantic human being store because she didn't get all the sticks she was promised?
that's one of the most Grandma V stories I've ever heard in my life. I'm gonna be honest. That's very similar to Grandma V.
Yes.
That's a very Grandma V story. My son, Owen Korkie.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that is interesting. And I do think there is like, yeah, I'm glad enforcers as they were when around the time when I was born are gone. I think everyone who's playing in the NHL should be able to play at that level. Speaking as someone who couldn't even sniff that level. I think anyone at that level, should be an NHL caliber player, or at least, Ryan Reeves. I don't think is necessarily he might be like an AHL caliber player, but even then, it's like if you're those guys could still play in the AHL and be really good AHLers if they didn't have that fighting aspect. And I do think it is annoying that it's a power trip from a politician that's doing it. I think the fact that the Quebec Major Junior, it's also the same person who said that there should be no contact in the Quebec Major Junior League for that year to reduce COVID spreading. It's the it's the same person who had
Uh,
that.
I mean, it's well, don't get me started on the COVID rules, the arbitrary COVID rules, because let's face it, if you're out there on the ice with people and you're playing hockey and you're coming into even, just the nature of the game is you're going to be right next to people. Whether you're hitting people or not is irrelevant. You come in close proximity. So it's just so dumb. It is so dumb. And all these people, well, all right, I'm going to say it right now, the people that were that thought that all like social distancing and taking hitting out of hockey because of COVID and but follow the science are just poorly educated people. And so that gives you a clue as to what the mentality of this person is, this minister of health. Chances are he's a dimwit. So that's what you've got dictating the future, the future of hockey in Quebec is some dimwit who doesn't understand science. He's poorly educated, and now he wants what he wants. So he's going to force it through. So I think everybody knows where I stand on it.
Yep. So that is true. But, speaking of physical hockey, I think there is very few teams physical that are as notorious as the 2011 Boston Bruins. And with the retirements today, there are only three players from that team left. The Rat, Brad Marchand, the rookie at the time, Tyler Sagan, and I'm trying to remember who the third one was, but I'm blanking on that now. Unfortunately, my intelligence and what I just looked at is showing, or my memory, I should say. But yeah, there are only Milan Lucic, of course. You're the Oilers legend, Milan Lucic, as he shall forever be known as Oilers legend, Milan Lucic. Uh,
Well, yeah. I mean, Boston. It was painful to watch them win that Stanley Cup because I've never, first I was a Montreal Canadiens fan, arch rival, Boston Bruins. Then I sort of switched over to the Oilers. Guess who they play in the finals twice? Boston Bruins. So obviously, I'm not a Boston Bruins fan. Then to see them win that Stanley Cup when Vancouver really had that, they had it in the bag until that big hit. Aaron Rome or whatever his name was, made that big hit and on Horton and got suspended, and that turned the whole series. So yeah, it's interesting to see what's become of that team, and now basically what they've done from last year's team, which is so good, is they got rid of Taylor Hall, Krejci just retired, Bergeron retired. Didn't they? Bertuzzi did not sign there, and
Bertuzzi's in Toronto now, yes.
right. And so then they replace them with Milan Lucic.
Well, he's
Uh,
an Oilers legend. You should.
yeah, but I mean, Boston. One thing I've learned about Boston is never count them out. Right?
Yeah.
They seem to have good management. So I would be surprised if they weren't competitive somehow again this year.
No, I think they're going to be competitive. They need to. We'll see what happens because I think a lot of people were saying, myself included, that it looked like the Eric Carlson deal with that $11.5 million of cap and where every team was close to the cap was kind of putting everyone's plans on hold to see where Eric Carlson was going. Because Carolina was in on Eric Carlson because Carolina just they like defensemen, like that's just their thing.
Yeah.
So anytime there's a defenseman available, it seems like Carolina's in the conversation. They just signed another defenseman. They have 9 defensemen on their roster now. Um, so
Well, it's
that's
probably the Brindamore effect, right? Like he's all about team and he's all about team defense and playing a system, and you have to have I mean, it starts up the middle, right? It starts with the goalie and then the defenseman and then your centers. So that's kind of how it goes. And if you do nothing else, having a solid defense core
yeah.
will will take you a long way.
Yeah. So and now like I think Carolina, they should probably look at maybe trading for William Nylander. I think it does depend. A lot of times when I say what teams should do, it depends on the return. Like trying to think um who was that? David Clarkson when he was a free agent. I mean, yeah, you should look to sign David Clarkson. Then when you look at what he got signed for, no, you shouldn't go for
Hmm.
David Clarkson. I think that there's always an asterisk when you say teams should go for a specific player. But Boston, I think they're rumored to be in on Elias Lindholm, which I think he's a two-way forward for Calgary. So like he'll probably fit in well. He's not going to be a replacement for Bergeron because you can't replace the second best defensive forward only behind Rod Brindamore, for that easily. So we'll see how it goes for Boston, but I am curious what they're going to do, and they still might have cap troubles to do anything. So
Yeah, I would think. I mean, you were talking about Nylander, and that'll be an interesting story. I think what Nylander, he's already making $6 million a year as sort of uh, he's a top six forward for sure. But from what I can gather, he would not be a fit in Carolina because he seems to me to be the type of guy who's looking for feature player money. I think he views himself as a feature player, and he's obviously not on Toronto. He's got two feature players in front of him, and I think he wants that money, and obviously Toronto can't afford that. Plus, they've got Tavares. Nylander is definitely better than Tavares at this point in his career, but Toronto can't afford that. So where do you trade him? Well, if you trade him to Carolina because he wants 10, $11 million a year, I'm pretty sure that's the number that he's going to be looking for. Then Carolina is that what Carolina wants for, is that the player they want for a future player? I mean, think about who they already have. They have Svechnikov, who's going to require big money. They have Aho, who just got a pretty nice contract, not astronomical, but can you fit William Nylander in at $10 million a year? I think he's going to have to go to a team that's got room for an 10, $11 million player, and that he's going to be their best player. And I can tell you, if he's your best player, you're not a cup contender.
Yeah. No, I think William Nylander, I think he's asking for too much money. I do think his agent is potentially at being like, hey, the cap's going to jump. So by the time his contract's over, he's going to be worth about 13, 14 million. So we'll take 11 million for $8 million a year is basically what the agent is selling. But I do think GM should be like, Gary Bettman's our commissioner. We don't know when the cap's going to go up. But because
I think it has to go up next year. But Bettman what I heard is very adamant that even though they've kind of delayed it, the most that he'll allow it to go up is what's in the collective bargaining agreement at the 5%. So it'll have to go up only 5% over the next few years, each year.
yeah, the NHL has maybe the worst. I'll say this about Gary Bettman. People overrate his ability to quote unquote grow the game, which are my least favorite words uttered about hockey now because it's so overused. But Gary Bettman's overrated in that he's really good at representing the owners. He's done it successfully 4 times now. So, and he's managed to have it so the cap can never just shoot up the way it did in basketball, which I disagree with. If the revenue calls for the cap to shoot up 50%, it should shoot up 50%. But Gary Bettman's being able to negotiate so that can't happen, which makes no sense, but it is what it is. And, it's just that, and that's why he's been commissioner for 30 years. But speaking of players that have been commissioner for 30 years, the a player who hasn't played, who was probably playing before Gary Bettman became commissioner, could come back, as the rumors are. Jaromir Jagr, the GOAT himself, is headed to Pittsburgh once again. Because Pittsburgh, if there's one thing Pittsburgh is lacking, it is veteran leadership. So it'll be interesting to see if that happens. Do you see Jaromir Jagr going to Pittsburgh at all?
Well, the fact that the rumor's out there is pretty interesting to me. There's two ways of increasing your talent pool, right? I mean, it's bringing in younger players or bringing in older players that, younger players before maybe they're ready, and older players after their prime. And I would say, obviously, he's after his prime. I don't know what they're thinking. Hey, if somehow if he manages to break Gordie Howe's record of being the oldest player in the NHL, that's impressive. But and he would, if he's getting in shape this summer, it can be done. I mean, like, I'm in better shape than you are, and I'm 53, and you're 20, in the NHL age range, so it can be done. Old guys can get in shape and outplay younger guys, but I don't think that he's what they need. We talked, there's been a lot of Penguins talk on this podcast the last 2 episodes, but we talked last episode about does Carlson reopen their Stanley Cup window? And I feel like this Jagr thing might be sort of a wing and a prayer of them trying to do whatever they have to reopen that Stanley Cup window.
I will say, and this is something that has only ever worked in wrestling, so I don't think it'll work here. Like, I think a lot of people said one thing that's cool about wrestling is you can have like Hulk Hogan versus Brock Lesnar because Hulk Hogan was like 60, still able to wrestle and stuff. And the thing is with wrestling, it's not a direct athletic competition. So if you're still in good shape, you can still wrestle and, be able to work with guys who are in their 20s and 30s. The Undertaker did it for 50 years. Jagr is approaching wrestling numbers if we can see Jagr and Connor Bedard share a sheet of ice. I don't see it happening. He only played home games for his team and I believe the KHL.
It was the
Uh
Czech league. The
yeah.
Czech league.
Yeah, he only played home games. He didn't go on the road. And
And
the
it's not like he was blowing the doors off the stats either. So if you looked at his NHL equivalency, it would be very, very low. Now that doesn't mean that because he's not probably not trying as hard as he can, or at least in terms of his training and his commitment to the team. He's just playing a good level of pro hockey with natural ability. So who knows what he can do if he applies himself. But my guess is if you looked at his NHL equivalency, it like maybe 10 points in the NHL. That's really not what Pittsburgh needs to be bringing in.
Yeah, and if you look at his career in Calgary, Calgary, I think, was struggling a little bit when he went to Calgary, and I think he just flat out didn't make that team. Pittsburgh, we talk about them. I said that they fell out of the playoffs. They're still a good team. They have Crosby, they have Malkin, they have now Eric Carlson, they have Letang. That's a very solid top four. That's basically a power play in and of itself. I don't know if Yager's good enough to make that team still. Um,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if there's a specific role, like let's say a guy like Brett Hall late in his career, like let's say Brett Hall decided to get in shape when he was 45 years old, and you surrounded him with burners. That shot itself, like just that shot doesn't go away, and he could, as long as you're feeding him or whatever, and you had surrounded, you could that could make
yeah,
sense to me. But Yager's more of an all-round sort of dominant player. Sure, he has a good shot, but it's not like he was the number one sniper of his era. He relied on having a fully rounded game, and that's obviously gone.
yeah,
So I don't know. I don't know what they're thinking. We'll see if it comes
yeah.
to pass.
I mean, that being said, as much as I don't know if on this podcast or even as on my other show, Hurricane Review, I don't know if I've talked about my hatred of Pittsburgh as much as I have with you in private conversations.
I'm aware of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, you're aware of it. Actually, Pittsburgh's not even my least favorite team anymore. With that general manager who almost caused the Hurricanes to move to Quebec, is gone from Pittsburgh now. That hatred has died down quite a bit. But
Jim
the
Rutherford, everybody. His name was Jim Rutherford.
yeah,
Where is he now? Is he retired now?
Vancouver. Um,
Oh,
and naturally he's doing a terrible job in Vancouver, and I like the Canucks quite a bit. So when he goes to teams I like, he ends up ruining their roster. So, and that shows you how overrated he was and shows you how good Malkin and Crosby were as a tandem. The fact that they got to get that moron two more Stanley Cups. Um, but that being said, do I want Yager to make a comeback and have like a 40-point season? Yes, I would love to see Yager come back. I'm rooting for Yager in this case. I just look at when you look at how his NHL career ended. His last run on the Calgary Flames legend Jaromir Yager. It's like I don't see how it's possible. I'd love to see it though. I'd
as
love to.
as an old guy, who continues to play, I'd be rooting for him too.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a single person that's rooting against Jaromir Jagr unless you hate Pittsburgh that much, which hating Pittsburgh that much is understandable. Very based opinion there. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out for Pittsburgh. And other than that, I think that's a symptom of the flat cap that Gary Bettman loves. He loves himself a flat cap. So yeah, we'll end it there, everyone. Thank you guys for watching. Uh, any final notes, Dad?
Stay horny, my friends.
All right. That's stupid. All right.